Hello everyone. Welcome to Realist Quill. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? I never thought much about hostels until that summer I spent backpacking through Eastern Europe. Before then, my travel experience was limited to chain hotels and the occasional Airbnb, safe, predictable places with digital footprints and customer service numbers. But when you're 23 with more wanderlust than money in your bank account, hostels become your best friend real quick. At least that's what I thought before Prague. It was my third week traveling and I'd already hit Berlin and Warsaw without any problems. A few noisy roommates, one instance of a stolen phone charger, standard stuff, nothing that would make for a good horror story. I was getting comfortable with the hostel routine. Lock your valuables up, be friendly but not too friendly, and always bring shower shoes. Basic survival skills for budget travelers. The place in Prague was called the Scholar's Haven. Cute name, right? It was in this beautiful old building that used to be a school or a monastery or something like that. Every old building in Prague seems to have some kind of historical significance. The online reviews were decent, not spectacular, but solid 3.5 stars, with most complaints focused on the creaky floors and temperamental plumbing. Nothing warned me about what I'd find in the attic. When I checked in, the guy at the front desk, I think his name was Tomasz, seemed normal enough. Mid-30s, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in a while, but friendly in that detached way. Hostel workers often are. When I got my key, he paused for just a second, looking at me with this strange expression before saying, "Room 42, top floor, last one on the right." I remember thinking it was weird that he emphasized last one on the right, like that. But I chalked it up to a language barrier thing. As I headed up the stairs, no elevator of course, I passed a few other travelers coming down, normal backpacker types, but I noticed they all glanced away when I mentioned I was heading to room 42. And one girl actually whispered something to her friend that made them both look back at me with these pitying expressions. By the time I reached the top floor, I was breathing heavy from lugging my backpack up 5 flights of stairs. The hallway was dimly lit with just a few bare bulbs casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. It was one of those old buildings where you can feel the history in the walls. Normally I love that kind of atmosphere, but something felt off. The air was noticeably colder up there, and there was this smell, hard to describe it even now, like old books mixed with something metallic. Room 42 was exactly where Tomasz said it would be, last door on the right. The brass numbers were tarnished almost black, and the door itself looked older than the others, heavier with these intricate carvings around the frame that I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. My key stuck in the lock at first, and I had to jiggle it before the mechanism finally gave way with a sound like sighing. Inside, the room was bigger than I expected. Most hostel dorms are cramped affairs with bunk beds packed in like sardines. But this one was spacious with high ceilings and tall, narrow windows that let in shafts of late afternoon sunlight. There were 6 beds total, but only one showed signs of being occupied. A lower bunk with a purple backpack on it, and a jacket hanging on the bedpost. I chose a top bunk near the window, figuring the breeze would be nice. As I was making my bed with the provided sheets, the door opened and in walked my roommate. She introduced herself as May, a grad student from Singapore who'd been in Prague for about a week. She seemed nice enough, though there was something guarded about her smile that I couldn't quite place. "You're the first person they've put in here with me," she said, as she sat on her bed. "Most nights, it's just been me." "Really? In high season? That's weird," I replied, tucking in the corners of my sheet. "Lucky us though, right? More space." She didn't answer right away, just stared at me with this intense look. "They don't like to put people in this room," she finally said. "I thought you should know that." I laughed, thinking she was messing with me. You know, that hostel initiation thing where more experienced travelers try to freak out the newbies. "What? Is it haunted or something?" She didn't laugh back. "I don't know about haunted, but something's not right here." Before I could ask her to elaborate, she suddenly switched subjects. asking me about my travels and where I was headed next. The conversation turned normal after that, and I started to think I'd imagined that weird intensity in her eyes. We chatted for a while as I unpacked my essentials, and then she headed out to meet some friends for dinner, inviting me along. I declined, exhausted from traveling all day, and planning to shower and maybe find a quiet place to eat nearby before crashing early. "Suit yourself," she said, pausing at the door. "I probably won't be back until late. And hey," she hesitated, seeming to choose her words carefully, "if you hear anything strange, just ignore it. The building's old. Pipes make noise. That's all." After she left, I took a long shower in the communal bathroom down the hall. It was one of those experiences where you're constantly toggling between freezing cold and scalding hot water. But it felt good to wash off the travel grime. By the time I got back to the room, the sun had almost set, casting the space in deep blues and purples. I switched on the overhead light, but it buzzed and flickered before settling into a dim yellowish glow that barely illuminated half the room. I decided to head out for food before it got too late. The hostel was in a quiet neighborhood away from the main tourist areas, and I had to walk about 10 minutes before finding a small pub that looked somewhat welcoming. I ordered goulash and a beer, using my limited Czech vocabulary and a lot of pointing. The food was good, hearty, and warm, but I kept finding myself distracted by this feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced up, though, all I saw were locals engaged in their own conversations, paying me no mind. By the time I walked back to the hostel, it was fully dark. The streets were poorly lit, and the old buildings loomed on either side, their facades transformed into ominous silhouette. I picked up my pace, suddenly eager to get back to the hostel, as ridiculous as that sounds now. Back inside, the common area was full of the usual hostel crowd, gap-year students playing drinking games, couples huddled over travel guides, solo travelers typing away on laptops. Normal stuff. I nodded at Tomasz as I passed the desk, and I swear he looked surprised to see me, like he hadn't expected me to come back. The 5 flights of stairs seemed even longer on the way up this time. With each floor, the sounds of laughter and conversation from the common area grew fainter, replaced by an oppressive silence that made the creaking of the stairs under my feet sound thunderous. By the 3rd floor, I noticed the temperature dropping. By the 5th, I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. The hallway to room 42 seemed longer than I remembered. As I approached my door, I heard something, a sound so faint, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. A scratching noise like fingernails on wood, coming from inside my room. I froze, key in hand, listening. After a few seconds, it stopped. Just the old building settling, I told myself, remembering May's words about ignoring strange noises. When I opened the door, the room was exactly as I'd left it. My stuff on my bunk, May's empty bed below, the other 4 beds pristine and untouched. But it was freezing inside, much colder than the hallway had been. I checked the windows, but they were all closed tight. As I moved across the room, I noticed something odd. The cold seemed to be concentrated in one specific area. The space between the bunk I'd chosen and the wall. It was like walking through a pocket of Arctic air. So cold it made my skin prickle and the hairs on my arms stand up. I decided to turn on my phone's flashlight and check out that section of the wall, thinking maybe there was a draft coming from somewhere. The wall looked normal at first. Just old, slightly peeling wallpaper with a faded floral pattern. But as I moved the light across it, I noticed a seam in the wallpaper that didn't quite match up with the rest. It formed a rectangle about the size of a door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed my hand against it. The wallpaper gave slightly, like there was a space behind it. I pressed harder, and suddenly there was a soft click, and the section of wall swung inward about an inch, revealing darkness beyond. I should have stopped there. Should have pushed that hidden door closed, packed my stuff, and asked for a different room. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled the door open wider and shined my light inside. It was a small room, more of a closet really, with a sloped ceiling that followed the roofline. The space was empty except for a single chair in the center, facing away from me toward the far wall. The chair was old, wooden, with a high back and ornate carvings, similar to the ones on the door frame of room 42. As my light swept across the room, I noticed the walls were covered in tally marks, thousands of them, scratched directly into the plaster, covering every inch of wall space. Some looked fresh, the plaster dust still visible on the floor beneath them. Others were clearly older, faded and yellowed with time. I took a step into the room, my curiosity overwhelming my growing sense of dread. The cold was intense in here, seeping into my bone. My breath fogged in front of me as I moved toward the chair, my light fixed on it. That's when I noticed there was something hanging from the ceiling above the chair, a rope, frayed and discolored, forming a crude I backed away quickly, my heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw it, a figure sitting in the chair. I couldn't have seen it when I first looked in, because of the high back, but now from this angle, I could see something was there. It wasn't moved, just sitting perfectly still, head bowed forward as if in prayer or sleep. I didn't scream. I think I was too terrified to make a sound. I just stood there, frozen, as the figure slowly began to turn the chair around to face me. It was a young woman, maybe my age or a little older. Her skin was gray and drawn tight over her bones, her eyes sunken deep into their sockets. She wore what might once have been a white dress, now yellowed and stained with substances I didn't want to identify. Her hair hung in lank strands around her face. She wasn't decomposed. She didn't look dead in the conventional sense, but she certainly didn't look alive either. For a long moment we just stared at each other. Then she opened her mouth, revealing blackened teeth, and whispered something I couldn't understand. It wasn't Czech or any language I recognized. The sound was dry and rasping like rustling paper. I finally found my voice and managed to stammer. "I'm sorry, I didn't know, I'll go now." I started backing toward the door, never taking my eyes off her. She stood up then, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I noticed her feet didn't quite touch the ground. She pointed at the tally marks on the wall and then at me, that horrible rasping sound issuing from her throat again. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and bolted through the door, slamming it shut behind me. Back in room 42, I grabbed my backpack, shoving my belongings into it haphazardly, not caring what I might be leaving behind. I had to get out of it. As I was frantically packing, the overhead light began to flicker more violently, and I heard that scratching sound again, louder now, coming from behind the hidden door, then a thump, then another. Something was trying to get through. I zipped up my bag and made for the door to the hallway, but as I reached for the handle, it began to rattle as if someone was trying to open it from the outside. Trapped between whatever was in the hidden room and whatever was trying to get in from the hallway, I stood paralyzed in the center of room 42, my mind racing with limited options. The rattling at the main door stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of a key in the lock. The door swung open to reveal May, looking surprised to see me standing there with my packed bag. "You're leaving?" she asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. She looked pale, her earlier friendly demeanor replaced with something more guarded. "There's something in there," I said, pointing to the wall where the hidden door was. Behind the wallpaper, a room with a person or something that used to be a person. May didn't look surprised. Instead, she sighed deeply, as if I'd confirmed something she already knew. "You opened it. I was hoping you wouldn't find it." "You knew?" My voice rose in pitch. "You knew that thing was in there and you didn't warn me?" "I tried to," she said quietly. "I told you to ignore strange noises. I hoped that would be enough." She sat down heavily on her bed. "I found it my first night here. I was alone, just like you." I opened the door and saw her. "What is she? A ghost?" May shook her head. "I don't think so. Not exactly. I've been doing some research at the library. This building, it wasn't just a school or a monastery. During World War II, it was used by the Gestapo. They interrogated people here, tortured them for information. That room, I think it was where they kept prisoners before questioning." The scratching from behind the wall had stopped. but now I could hear something else. A low, mournful humming that seemed to vibrate through the floor and up into my feet. So she's what? The ghost of someone they killed, I asked, trying to make sense of it all. That's what I thought at first, May replied. But now I'm not so sure. I think she's something the pain and suffering in that room created. Something that's not quite human anymore, but still conscious, still aware. And I think she's trapped there, counting the days. She gestured toward the wall. Those tally marks, they go back decades, long after the war ended. Why are we in this room then? I demanded. Why would the hostel put anyone in here if they know about? May laughed. But there was no humor in it. They don't put just anyone in here. Haven't you wondered why this room is so much bigger than the others? Why it's at the end of the hall, isolated? They charge less for this room. They put people here who they think won't notice, won't complain. Foreign students, backpackers who book last minute and are just passing through. That doesn't make any sense, I argued. Why keep the room open at all? Why not just seal it up permanently and convert the space into something else? Money, May said simply. This place struggles to stay afloat. They need every bed they can rent. And besides, she lowered her voice, I don't think they can seal it up. I've talked to one of the cleaning staff, an old woman who's worked here since before it was a hostel. She said they've tried boarding up that room multiple times over the years. The boards always come down. The wallpaper tears itself open. Whatever's in there wants to be found. The humming grew louder, and now I could feel the vibration in my teeth. A sensation so unpleasant it made me nauseous. I'm getting out of here, I said, slinging my backpack over my shoulder. You should too, May nodded. I'm leaving tomorrow. My research is done, and I've stayed too long already. But listen. She stood up and grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. Be careful, she marks people who see her. I've been having dreams, terrible dreams where she's showing me the tally marks, adding a new one each night, and I keep seeing her around the city. Glimpses of her in crowds, reflections in windows. I think she can follow us out of this room. As if to confirm her words, the light fixture above us shattered suddenly, plunging the room into darkness, except for the faint glow coming from beneath the hidden door. A sickly greenish light that hadn't been there before. We both ran for the hallway door, but when May turned the handle it wouldn't budge, locked or jammed somehow. She cursed in what I assumed was Mandarin, and started throwing her weight against it while I fumbled with my phone, trying to turn the flashlight back on. Behind us I heard a slow creak, the sound of the hidden door swinging open. In the darkness I couldn't see it, but I felt the rush of cold air and smelled something rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. My phone's flashlight finally came on, and I aimed it at the door we were trying to escape through. There was no visible lock, no reason it shouldn't open. May was still slamming against it, her slight frame barely making the wood shudder. Help me, she shouted, and I joined her, both of us ramming the door with our shoulders. Behind us the creaking of the hidden door grew louder, and the humming changed pitch, becoming more like a drawn-out moan, just as I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. Fingers, I think, or what felt like fingers. The hallway door gave way suddenly, sending both May and me sprawling into the corridor. We scrambled to our feet and ran without looking back, down all 5 flights of stairs through the common area, where other guests looked up in alarm as we barreled past and out into the street. We didn't stop running until we were several blocks away, beneath the bright lights of a busy intersection where late-night tourists and locals mingled. Both of us were gasping for breath, our faces slick with sweat despite the cool night air. What do we do now? I asked between breaths. May checked her watch. It's almost midnight. No other hostels will be checking people in this late. She thought for a moment. I know a 24-hour cafe near here. We can stay there until morning, then find new accommodations. That's what we did. We spent the night in a brightly lit cafe, ordering coffee after coffee to justify our presence, jumping at every shadow and barely speaking. I kept expecting to see that gaunt face pressed against the window, those blackened teeth bared in a smile. But the night passed without incident. In the morning, exhausted and jittery from too much caffeine and too little sleep, we parted ways. May had a flight to catch that afternoon, and I managed to book a bed in another hostel across town. We exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch, but I think we both knew we wouldn't. Some experiences you just want to leave behind. I spent 3 more days in Prague, constantly looking over my shoulder. Convinced I was being followed, I'd catch glimpses of white fabric disappearing around corners, hear that distinctive humming in crowded rooms, wake up from nightmares where I was sitting in that chair, rope around my neck, adding another tally mark to the wall. By the time I boarded my train to Budapest, I was a nervous wreck. It's been 5 years since then. I finished my trip, came home, got a job, moved on with my life. I rarely think about what happened in room 42 anymore, but sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment late at night, I hear scratching from inside my walls. And sometimes, in the mirror just for a second, I see someone standing behind me, a young woman in a stained white dress, her finger raised as if counting. Last month, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, no text in the body, just an attachment. A photograph. It showed a section of wall covered in tally marks, and a hand adding a new one. The hand was skeletal, the skin gray and pulled tight over the bones, but I could clearly see a bracelet on the wrist, a distinctive jade bangle that May had been wearing the night we met. I tried replying to the email, but it bounced back. I searched for May online, found her academic profile at the university in Singapore, and sent a message there. A week later, I received a response from the department administrator. May had never returned from her research trip to Prague 5 years ago. They'd filed a missing persons report, but no trace of her had ever been found. I wonder sometimes if I should go back to Prague, back to the Scholars' Haven, to warn them, or to try to help whatever is trapped in that hidden room. But then I remember the tally marks, thousands upon thousands of them, and I wonder how many of those marks represent people who came back. How many represent people like May, who never made it home. So I stay away, and I keep my own tally now, counting the days since I last heard the scratching, since I last saw her reflection in my mirror. The current count is 16. The longest I've gone is 32. I don't know what will happen when the counting stops. I'm not sure I want to find out. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself scratching marks into my bedroom wall, not fully aware I'm doing it until my fingernails are raw and bleeding. And in those moments, I swear I can hear her voice, clearer now than it was in that hidden room, whispering to me across the miles and years, "Soon you'll understand, soon you'll come back." Everyone does. Everyone joins me in the end. So if you ever find yourself in Prague, staying at a hostel called the Scholars' Haven, and they give you a room on the top floor, the last one on the right, do yourself a favor. Turn around, walk away, and don't look back, because once you've seen what's behind that wall, it never stops seeing you. I've been thinking about May a lot lately, about those tally marks, about what they might really be counting down to, and I've noticed something strange. The scratching in my walls has stopped, completely. For the first time in 5 years, there's silence, and somehow that scares me more than any noise ever could, because I'm starting to think the counting has finally ended, and I'm not sure what comes next. Wait, did you hear that? That soft humming sound? No, you probably can't hear it through the screen, but I can hear it, getting louder now. And is it just my imagination? Or did the temperature in this room just drop? I should go. I need to check something. There's a section of wallpaper in my bedroom that's been peeling lately, forming what looks like the outline of a door. I've been meaning to fix it, but something always stops me. Maybe tonight, I'll finally see what's behind it. Wish me luck. And remember what I said about someone's knocking on my door now. Soft, insistent tapping. It's probably nothing. Just the building settling. That's all. That's all. Isn't. I've worked a lot of dead-end jobs in my day, but nothing quite compares to my 3 months as the night receptionist at the Wanderer's Way hostel. It was supposed to be simple. Check in late arrivals, make sure drunk backpackers didn't burn the place down, and basically just exist at the front desk from midnight to 8 a.m. Easy money, or so I thought. This was back in 2018, right after I'd graduated college with a useless liberal arts degree and a mountain of student debt. I needed cash, and the Wanderer's Way was desperate for someone to cover the graveyard shift after their previous night receptionist quit without notice. Looking back, I should have asked more questions about why they left, but hindsight's a cruel teacher. The hostel itself was this massive converted Victorian mansion in New Orleans, about 4 blocks from Bourbon Street, close enough to the action that budget travelers flocked there, but just far enough away that you didn't hear the worst of the party noise. During the day, the place had this quirky charm with its mismatched vintage furniture, walls covered in Polaroids from previous guests, and a courtyard with fairy lights strung across old oak trees. But at night, well, old houses make different kinds of noises after dark. My first week was uneventful. I'd sit behind the antique reception desk, reading or scrolling through my phone, occasionally checking in some bleary-eyed traveler who'd just gotten off a late flight. The manager, a weathered guy named Jerry who'd apparently traveled through every country in the world twice over, gave me a quick orientation and then pretty much left me to figure things out on my own. Just remember to lock the front gate at 2 a.m., he told me on my first night. Anyone coming in after that needs their key card. And whatever you do, don't go up to the 3rd floor after midnight. We're renovating up there and the floors aren't stable. I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. Old houses need work, especially in New Orleans, where the humidity warps everything eventually. The hostel had 2 floors of guest rooms, mostly dorms with 6-8 beds each, plus a few private rooms for couples or those willing to pay extra. The 3rd floor, I assumed, was just storage or unused space. The only other thing Jerry emphasized was the logbook, a thick leather-bound tome that looked like it belonged in a Harry Potter movie rather than a modern hostel. Every night receptionist has kept this log since we opened in 1993, he explained, running his fingers over the worn cover. You write down anything unusual that happens during your shift. Maintenance issues, problem guests, that sort of thing. The day staff needs to know. I flipped through it, noticing that the entries grew increasingly sparse over the past few months. The last night receptionist, someone named Malik, had only made a few cryptic entries before apparently abandoning the job. 3:14:18, 2:17 a.m. Noises from 3rd floor again. Called Jerry, no answer. Not going up there. 3:17:18, 3:42 a.m. Room 7 guest complained about scratching in walls. Moved her to room 12. 3:4:20:18, 4:05 a.m. She's getting closer. That was the last entry. When I asked Jerry about it, he just shrugged and said Malik had personal problems and had moved back to Chicago suddenly. I didn't push it. I needed the job too badly to rock the boat. For the first 2 weeks, my shifts were monotonous but easy. The hostel had a strict quiet policy after 11 p.m., so most guests were either out partying or sleeping. I'd do my rounds once an hour, checking that exit doors were secure and no one was breaking any major rules in the common area. The rest of the time, I just had to stay awake and man the desk in case of emergency. It was during my 3rd week that things started getting weird. It began with the noises, soft at first, easily dismissed as old house sounds or the movements of restless travelers. Creaking floorboards, the occasional thump like someone dropping a shoe while trying to be quiet. All normal stuff in a building full of people. But then I started hearing footsteps from the 3rd floor, the supposedly empty, under-renovation 3rd floor. Light, deliberate steps, pacing back and forth directly above the reception area where I sat. The first time it happened, around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I called Jerry despite the hour. Probably raccoons, he mumbled. clearly half asleep. Or maybe the wind is moving something around up there. Don't worry about it unless you hear screaming. He hung up before I could ask why screaming would be his threshold for concern. The next night I heard it again. The same measured footsteps, back and forth, back and forth. This time they were accompanied by another sound, humming. A woman's voice, soft but clear, humming a melody I couldn't quite place. Something old-fashioned, like a lullaby my grandmother might have sung. I wrote it in the logbook, 4/11/18, 3:14 a.m. Footsteps and humming from third floor. Raccoons don't hum. Should I check it out? When I came in for my shift the next evening, I found a response scrawled beneath my entry in different handwriting. Do not go to third floor. The warning was unsigned, but it wasn't Jerry's handwriting. I assumed it was one of the day staff, maybe the motherly housekeeper, Maria, who always left cookies in the staff room and crossed herself whenever she passed the stairs to the third floor. I heeded the warning for about a week. The footsteps and humming continued nightly, usually starting around 3 a.m. and lasting for about 20 minutes before stopping abruptly. I got used to it, in the way you can get used to almost anything if it becomes routine enough. I'd put in my earbuds, turn up my music, and try to focus on whatever book I was reading. Then came the night everything escalated. It was a stormy Tuesday in late April, the kind of thunderous downpour that New Orleans specializes in. We were unusually empty, only about half the beds filled, and most guests had decided to brave the rain for the promise of cheap hurricane cocktails on Bourbon Street. By 1 a.m., the hostel was silent except for the drumming of rain on the old slate roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. At precisely 3:14 a.m., I remember checking the antique grandfather clock behind the desk. The footsteps started again, but this time, they weren't just pacing. They were coming down the stairs from the third floor. My first thought was that maybe Jerry had authorized some late-night maintenance work without telling me. My second thought was that we had an intruder. Either way, I needed to check it out. I grabbed the heavy flashlight we kept under the desk, more as a potential weapon than for illumination, and moved quietly to the base of the main staircase. The hostel had one of those grand staircases that split into two halfway up, creating a Y-shape. The second floor landing was dimly lit by emergency lights, but beyond that, the stairs leading to the third floor were swallowed by darkness. I stood there listening as the footsteps descended slowly, deliberately, each creak of the old wood punctuated by the storm outside. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite my racing heart. "The hostel is closed for check-ins. If you're a guest, please identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard that humming again, closer now, just at the edge of the second floor landing where the shadows were thickest. Then a voice, soft and lilting with an accent I couldn't place, said, "I need a room for the night, please. It's raining so hard out there." A chill ran through me. There was something off about the voice. It sounded distant and close at the same time, like it was coming through an old radio. And how could someone be coming down from the third floor, claiming to be caught in the rain? "The reception desk is this way," I said, gesturing back toward the lobby, deciding to play along until I could get a better look at whoever, or whatever was speaking. "Why don't you come into the light so I can check you in?" A soft laugh echoed down the stairwell. "Oh, but I'm already checked in. Room 33. Don't you remember me? I've been here for such a long time." Room 33. The number struck me as odd immediately, because our room numbers only went up to 24. The third floor, if it had rooms at all, wasn't numbered or in use. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," I said, my mouth dry. "We don't have a room 33. Why don't you come down and we can sort this out?" Another laugh, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor above. "Why don't you come up instead? I can show you my room. I've made it so pretty for visitors." Thunder crashed outside, and in the brief flash of lightning that illuminated the stairwell, I saw her, a figure standing at the top of the stairs, to the third floor. The glimpse was too brief to make out details, just the silhouette of a woman in what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown. Her hair long and loose around her shoulders. When darkness returned, I found myself frozen in place, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Every instinct told me to run, to get out of the hostel and never come back. But I had responsibilities, sleeping guests who might be in danger if there really was an intruder. "I'm calling the police," I said loudly, hoping my voice didn't betray my fear. "Unless you come down right now and explain who you are." "The police?" The voice sounded amused. "They've been here before, many times. They never find anything interesting." The way she emphasized interesting made my skin crawl. "But go ahead, call them. While you wait, maybe you could bring me some fresh towels? The ones in my room are so stained now." I backed away slowly, fumbling for my cell phone in my pocket. As I retreated toward the reception desk, I heard the footsteps resume, coming down the stairs now, unhurried but purposeful. I didn't wait to see what would emerge from the darkness. I ran to the desk and grabbed the landline phone, punching in 911 with shaking fingers. While the phone rang, I glanced back at the staircase. There was no one there. But the footsteps continued, now on the second floor landing, moving along the corridor, where guests were sleeping. I gave the emergency dispatcher the address and tried to explain the situation without sounding like a lunatic. "There's an intruder in the building," I said, keeping my voice low. "A woman. She came from the third floor, which is supposed to be empty. I'm concerned for the guests' safety." The dispatcher assured me they would send someone right away and advised me to stay on the line. As I waited, I heard a door open on the second floor, the distinctive creak of the hinges on room 7, which I knew was occupied by a young couple from Australia. Then came a scream, high-pitched and cut short, like someone had clasped a hand over the screamer's mouth. I dropped the phone and grabbed the flashlight again, my concern for the guests overriding my fear. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I rushed up to the second floor, calling out, "Hello, is everyone okay?" The corridor was empty and silent when I reached it. All the doors were closed, including room 7. I approached cautiously, listening for any sounds from within. Nothing. I knocked gently. "Hello, this is hostel staff." I heard a scream. "Is everything all right?" No response. I used my master key to open the door, bracing myself for whatever I might find. The room was dark, but my flashlight revealed 2 forms in the bottom bunk. The Australian couple, apparently sound asleep. The man had his arm around the woman protectively, both breathing deeply. Confused, I was about to leave when I noticed something odd about their position. They seemed too still, too perfectly arranged, like mannequins posed for a display. I moved closer, the beam of my flashlight revealing their faces. Their eyes were open, wide open and staring at the ceiling, though neither blinked nor acknowledged my presence. Their chests rose and fell with breathing, but there was no other movement. Not even a flicker of reaction when I waved my hand in front of their faces. "Hey," I whispered. Then louder. "Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. It was as if they were awake but completely paralyzed, trapped in their own bodies. And then I noticed something else. A dark stain spreading across the white sheets beneath them, seeping from under their still forms. I pulled back the thin blanket to reveal the source. Both of their throats had been cut, not deeply enough to kill them instantly, but enough that they were slowly bleeding out. The wounds were precise, almost surgical, and fresh enough that the blood was still flowing freely. I stumbled backward in horror, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls as my hand shook. That's when I saw it, written on the wall above their bed in what could only be their own blood. "Room 33. Needs towels." I ran back down the corridor, down the stairs, straight to the front desk where I'd left the phone dangling off the hook. I could hear the dispatcher's tiny voice still asking if I was there. I grabbed it, babbling about injured guests and needing ambulances immediately. As I was speaking, the lights in the lobby flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lights kicked on a moment later, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. And in that dim light, I saw her clearly for the first time. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, a woman in an old-fashioned white nightgown, now stained dark with what I knew must be blood. Her hair was long and black, hanging in wet tangles around a face that might once have been beautiful, but was now gaunt and gray, with deep shadows under her eyes. Her feet were bare and filthy, leaving dark smudges on the polished wood floor as she took a step toward me. "Room 33, she said, her voice clearer now, with a slight accent I could place as French Creole. "I've been waiting so long for a good night's sleep. Will you check me in properly this time?" I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The phone slipped from my grasp as she took another step closer. I could smell her now, a sickly sweet odor of decay barely masked by the scent of cheap perfume. "You're not real," I finally managed to whisper. She tilted her head, regarding me with eyes that reflected the emergency lights like a cat's. "More real than you know. I've been here since before this was a hostel, since before the war. This was my family's home, until they decided I was too troubled to live among them." Another step closer. I could see details now that I wished I couldn't. The dark crescents of dirt under her fingernails, the way her nightgown was torn at the shoulders as if she'd been grabbed roughly, the unnaturally sharp teeth visible when she smiled. They locked me away on the third floor, room 33, my own private asylum. Her smile widened, and when that didn't cure me, they decided more permanent measures were needed. "Do you know what it's like to be held down by your own father and brother, while your mother pours poison down your throat, to feel it burning through you while they pray over your dying body?" She was close enough now that I could have reached out and touched her. I didn't. Instead, I found myself backing around the reception desk, putting that barrier between us. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Her expression softened into something almost sad. "Company. It gets so lonely in room 33. I've had visitors over the years, night staff like you who got curious about the sounds upstairs. The maintenance man who came to fix the leak last year. That nice Muslim boy who had your job before you, but they never stay long enough." The mention of Malik, my predecessor, sent a chill through me. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing he didn't agree to," she said with a shrug. "He came upstairs of his own free will, just like you're going to." "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, trying to sound firm despite my terror. She laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Oh, but you will. Everyone does, eventually. Curiosity is such a powerful force. Even now, part of you wants to see room 33, doesn't it? To know if I'm real or just a hallucination. To understand what happened to the others." She wasn't wrong. Despite my fear, there was a nagging desire to know the truth. To see what was really up there on the third floor. The wail of approaching sirens broke the moment. The woman's head snapped toward the sound, her expression darkening. "Visitors," she hissed, always interrupting us. She turned back to me, her movements suddenly jerky and unnatural. "They won't find me. They never do. But I'll be waiting for you upstairs when they leave. Room 33 is always open for staff." With that, she moved toward the stairs, not walking but gliding, her feet no longer touching the ground, the smudged footprints she'd left ending abruptly. As she reached the bottom step, she looked back at me one last time. "Don't make me come find you," she said softly. "I don't like leaving my room. It makes such a mess, as your Australian friends discovered." Then she was gone, ascending the stairs so quickly that it looked like she was being yanked upward by an invisible force. By the time the police entered the lobby a minute later, there was no sign she had ever been there at all, except for the dark footprints on the floor, which one officer immediately noticed and questioned me about. The next few hours were a blur. Paramedics rushed to room 7 and transported the Australian couple to the hospital. police searched the building but found no intruder. The third floor, when they checked it, was dusty and abandoned, clearly untouched for years, with no signs of recent passing. Room 33, if it had ever existed, was nowhere to be found. Jerry arrived shortly after the police, disheveled and smelling of whiskey. He took me aside while the officers were interviewing other guests who'd been woken by the commotion. "You went up there, didn't you?" he asked, his bloodshot eyes intense. "After I specifically told you not to." "I didn't," I insisted. "She came downstairs. She hurt those people in room 7, and she said she did something to Malik too." Jerry's face paled. "Malik went up to the 3rd floor his last night here, against explicit instructions. We found his backpack and wallet the next day, but no sign of him. The police said he probably just left town, abandoned his stuff. She said he went up there willingly," I whispered, "just like she thinks I will." Jerry gripped my shoulders hard. "Listen to me. Whatever she told you, whatever she promised or threatened, ignore it. Don't go up there, ever. No matter what you hear or see." "What is she?" He shook his head. "Something that should have died a long time ago but didn't. Something that feeds on curiosity and fear. The family that owned this house before it became a hostel. They had a daughter who went mad. The story goes that they kept her locked in a room on the 3rd floor for years. When she died, they simply sealed up the room with her body still inside." "Room 33, I murmured. The 3rd floor originally had rooms numbered 25 through 36. Jerry confirmed. "When I bought this place in '93, we renovated the first 2 floors but left the 3rd untouched. Too many structural issues and frankly too many stories about that room. The previous owners warned me never to disturb it. But you rent out room 7 directly below it," I said accusingly. Jerry had the decency to look ashamed. "Business has been tough. We needed the income from every possible room. I thought maybe the stories were exaggerated. Those people almost died tonight." I know," he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We'll close room 7 permanently, and I'll find someone to come in and properly seal off the 3rd floor, a priest or something." But I knew it wouldn't help. Whatever was in room 33 had been there for generations, surviving all attempts to contain it. And now it had noticed me. I quit that night. Told Jerry I wouldn't be back for another shift, not even to collect my final paycheck. He didn't argue, just nodded wearily and asked me not to talk to the press about what had happened. "For the sake of the business," he said, as if that was my concern after what I'd seen. I moved out of New Orleans a week later, telling myself it was for a job opportunity in Houston, rather than admitting I was fleeing from the memory of that blood-stained woman and her invitation to room 33. I never told anyone the full story of what happened that night. Who would believe me? But distance hasn't helped as much as I'd hoped, because sometimes in the darkest hours of the night, I hear humming that same old-fashioned lullaby, just on the edge of hearing. And in those moments, I feel an almost irresistible urge to seek out the source, to climb stairs I know will lead me somewhere I shouldn't go. Last month, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just my name and current address, written in an elegant, old-fashioned hand. Inside was a single hotel key, old and brass, with the number 33 engraved on it, and a note, written on the Wanderer's Way stationery. "Your room is still waiting. I've kept it ready for you." I threw the key away, but the next morning I found it on my bedside table, inexplicably returned. I've tried disposing of it 3 more times, buried it in the trash, dropped it in a lake, even mailed it to a random address in Alaska. It always comes back. The Australian couple survived, by the way. I checked the news obsessively in the weeks after the incident. They both lost a lot of blood but made full physical recoveries. Mentally, though, the articles suggested they weren't doing so well. They kept talking about a woman who paralyzed them with her eyes and whispered stories in their ears all night, while they slowly bled out. Stories about room 33, and all the people who died there over the decades. The police never found any sign of an intruder at the hostel. The official report blamed the attack on a disturbed guest, who must have fled before authorities arrived. They never found Malek, either. As for the Wanderer's Way, it's still in operation, though under a new name and management. Jerry sold it about a month after my last shift. The listing described it as a charming historic property with unlimited potential and unique character. No mention of the third floor or room 33. I often wonder who's working the night shift there now, and if they're hearing footsteps above them as they try to focus on their book or phone. I wonder if they've been invited upstairs yet. Sometimes I dream about the third floor, a long, dusty corridor with doors on either side, all hanging open to reveal empty, abandoned rooms, all except one at the very end, freshly painted with the number. In these dreams, I'm walking toward that door, drawn by the humming coming from within. I always wake up just as my hand reaches for the doorknob, but lately the dreams have been lasting longer. Last night I actually opened the door in my dream. I saw what was waiting for me en route. I saw what happened to Malek, and all the others before him. I saw what will eventually happen to me, because I know now that she wasn't lying. Everyone does go up there eventually. Curiosity doesn't just kill cat. I've started hearing footsteps in my apartment at night, coming from the ceiling, even though I live on the top floor. And sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I see dark, wet footprints appearing on my floor, one after another, as if someone invisible is walking toward me. The key to room 33 is on my desk as I write this. I've stopped trying to get rid of it. Tonight I think I might use it. Not because I want to, but because I know she'll keep coming for me if I don't. Better to face what's waiting in room 33 than to have it follow me for the rest of my life. So if you ever find yourself working the night shift at a hostel, or any old building with a sealed-off section, my advice is simple. Respect the boundaries. Don't go exploring. Don't follow strange sounds. And if someone invites you to a room that shouldn't exist, for the love of God, don't. Because once you've been noticed by something like her, curiosity becomes a compulsion, and some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. Room 33 is calling. I think it's finally time I answer. I've been trying to make sense of what happened at the Traveler's Retreat hostel for 6 months now. Therapists say I need to process the trauma, to work through it logically. So here's my attempt to document everything. Maybe putting it in words will help me convince myself it was all just an elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and culture shock. Let me start at the beginning. I was 22, fresh out of college with a communications degree and 0 job prospects. My student debt was crushing, and the idea of moving back to my parents' place in suburban Ohio filled me with dread. So when I saw the posting for an international cultural exchange program in rural Japan, room and board provided in exchange for helping at a local hostel and teaching English to staff, it seemed like the perfect escape. The program website showed pictures of a traditional Japanese inn nestled in a picturesque mountain village. The listing emphasized authentic cultural immersion and an experience far from the usual tourist path. In retrospect, they weren't lying about that last part. My application was accepted surprisingly quickly. Within 2 weeks, I was on a plane to Tokyo, armed with nothing but a single suitcase, a Japanese phrase book, and the starry-eyed optimism of someone who'd never traveled alone before. The program coordinator, a man named Tanaka, met me at the airport. He wasn't what I expected. Tall for a Japanese man, impeccably dressed in a Western suit, with perfect English and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You will be the only foreigner in the village," he told me during the train ride from Tokyo. "The locals are traditional. They may seem standoffish at first, but they will warm to you if you respect their ways." I nodded enthusiastically, still riding the high of finally doing something adventurous with my life. I'm so excited to immerse myself in authentic Japanese culture. I've been practicing my basic phrases. Tanaka's expression didn't change. "Some traditions are not in your phrase book," he said cryptically. "The village of Kurosawa has customs that date back centuries. Very old customs that they take quite seriously." At the time, I assumed he was talking about formal tea ceremonies or removing shoes before entering buildings, the kind of cultural differences mentioned in travel guides. I had no idea what customs really meant in Kurosawa. The journey grew progressively more remote. First the bullet train, then a local line, then a bus winding up mountain roads so narrow I had to close my eyes at the hairpin turns. When we finally arrived, it was late afternoon, the sun already dipping behind the densely forested mountains that surrounded the village on all sides. Kurosawa was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 30 traditional wooden houses arranged along a main road, with smaller paths branching off between them. No convenience stores, no vending machines, none of the modern touches I'd seen in Tokyo. It looked like a movie set for a period drama, frozen sometime in the early 1900s. The hostel, the traveler's retreat, sat at the village's edge, larger than the surrounding houses, with a sweeping tiled roof and paper lanterns hanging from the eaves. It was beautiful in the golden light of sunset, exactly what I'd pictured when dreaming of traditional Japan. Tanaka introduced me to the hostel owner, an elderly woman named Sato. She was tiny, barely reaching my shoulders, with a face as creased as origami paper and eyes that seemed to evaluate every inch of me. She spoke no English, so Tanaka translated her welcome, which consisted mainly of a long list of rules I was to follow during my stay. Never enter the back room of the hostel. Never leave the village without telling Sato. Never be outside after dark. Always wear the protective charm she was giving me. Never remove it, not even while bathing. And most importantly, never open my door at night, no matter what I heard. I nodded along, attributing the strange rules to cultural differences, and perhaps the overprotectiveness of an elderly woman toward a foreign guest. The charm was a small fabric pouch on a cord, which I dutifully hung around my neck. It smelled strongly of herbs and something metallic I couldn't identify. My room was small but comfortable, with traditional tatami mats, a futon rolled up in the corner and sliding paper doors. There was no lock, which struck me as odd for a hostel, but I figured rural Japan had different security concerns than American cities. The other staff will help you learn your duties tomorrow, Tanaka said as he prepared to leave. For tonight, stay in your room. The journey has been long. He paused at the door, his expression unreadable. Remember the rules, Quinn-san. They are for your protection. Before I could ask what exactly I needed protection from, he was gone, leaving me alone in a strange room in a strange village, suddenly questioning all my life choices. That first night was unsettling. The hostel was eerily quiet despite Sato-san mentioning there were other guests. I could hear the wind in the trees outside and the occasional creak of the old wooden building settling. But no human sounds, no footsteps, no voices, no doors sliding open or closed. Until about 3 a.m., when I was startled awake by what sounded like fingernails scratching at my paper door. Soft at first, then more insistent, then a voice, speaking in Japanese, a child's voice. I thought, though I couldn't understand the words. I remembered Sato-san's rule about not opening the door at night, and stayed frozen in my futon, heart racing. The scratching continued for almost an hour before stopping abruptly. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream, just my brain processing the stress of travel and new surroundings. My first day of work started early. Sato-san introduced me to the other staff, 2 middle-aged women named Yuki and Hana, and a young man about my age named Kenji. They all regarded me with the same evaluating stare Sato-san had used, like I was a specimen under a microscope. Only Kenji showed any warmth, offering a shy smile, and the only English phrase he seemed to know, "Welcome to Kurosawa." My duties were straightforward. Clean rooms after guests departed, help serve breakfast, and teach English to the staff for 2 hours each afternoon. The work wasn't difficult, but something felt off from the beginning. The guests were strange. They kept to themselves, barely acknowledging me when I entered their rooms to clean. They all wore protective charms similar to mine, even in the bathrooms or hot spring bath, and they all vacated the hostel before sunset, disappearing into the village or their rooms, doors firmly shut until morning. During my first English lesson, I tried to engage the staff by having them practice introductions and basic conversation. Kenji was enthusiastic, but Yuki and Hana seemed reluctant to share any personal information. "How long have you worked at the hostel?" I asked Yuki in simplified English, demonstrating the question structure. She glanced at Hana before answering in halting English. "Always, Family business. Where are you from originally? I asked Hana. Kurosawa. All from Kurosawa. She touched her protective charm as she spoke, a gesture I would come to recognize as a nervous habit among the villagers. Only Kenji seemed willing to engage more deeply. After the lesson, as we were cleaning up the dining area, he moved closer to me and whispered, "You have questions. I see in your eyes." His English was better than he'd let on during the lesson. I seized the opportunity. "Yes. Why all the protective charms? Why can't we go out after dark? Is it bears or something?" He looked around nervously before responding. "Not bears. Something else. Something hungry." He struggled for the right words. "Village has arrangement. Very old. We are safe if we follow rule." Before I could press him for details, Sato-san appeared in the doorway saying something sharp in Japanese that made Kenji bow and hurry away. She fixed me with those evaluating eyes, said something that sounded like a warning, and shuffled off. That night, the scratching at my door returned, earlier this time around midnight. The child's voice was joined by others, adult voices murmuring in Japanese, occasionally saying what sounded like my name. I put my pillow over my head and eventually fell into an uneasy sleep. The next few days established a routine: work, English lessons, brief conversations with Kenji when we could manage it without being observed, and the nightly visitors at my door that I tried my best to ignore. I started exploring the village during my free time in the afternoons, hoping to understand more about where I was. Kurosawa was like a place time forgot. The residents went about their daily activities, tending gardens, hanging laundry, sweeping storefronts, but they fell silent when I passed, watching me with the same evaluating stare I'd received at the hostel. Children were quickly ushered inside, doors closed. Only the protective charm seemed abundant and openly displayed, hanging from every doorway and worn by every person I saw. On my fourth day, I discovered a small shrine at the village's edge, opposite from the hostel. It looked ancient, the stone weathered and covered in moss, with fresh offerings of rice and sake placed before a statue so eroded I couldn't make out what it once depicted. An old man was tending the shrine, replacing print incense sticks with fresh ones. When he saw me watching, he beckoned me closer. He was the first villager who seemed genuinely pleased to see me. In broken English mixed with Japanese, he tried to explain the shrine's significance. I understood little, catching only phrases like "hungry ones." The exchange and balance must be maintained. He kept pointing between the shrine and the distant outline of the hostel, repeating portal and another Japanese word I didn't recognize. When I showed him my protective charm, asking what it was for, his friendly demeanor vanished. He backed away, making what looked like a warding gesture, and hurried off without another word. Returning to the hostel, I ran into Kenji bringing in fresh linens. I described my encounter, hoping he could explain. "You should not go to shrine," he said, voice low. "Dangerous to ask questions about these things." "What things?" I pressed. "Everyone keeps warning me without explaining why. What's going on in this village?" He glanced around before pulling me into the empty laundry room. "The hostel, not normal hostel, is bridge." He struggled for words. "Bridge between worlds. Guests, not normal tourists. They come for exchange." "Exchange? You mean like me? A cultural exchange program?" His laugh was hollow. "No, different exchange. They give something. They take something." He touched his protective charm. "These keep us safe from being taken." Before I could ask more questions, we heard Sato-san calling for him. Kenji looked panicked. "Be careful, Quinn-san. Your charm never remove, and count guests. Each day, always count." That night, I lay awake listening to the now familiar scratching at my door, pondering Kenji's words, "Count the guests." The next morning, I did just that, discreetly keeping track as they came down for breakfast. 7 guests, 3 older Japanese men traveling alone. a middle-aged couple, and two young women who I guessed were in their 20s. After breakfast, while cleaning rooms, I noticed something odd. There were 8 guest rooms, but only 7 guests at breakfast. I checked the guest register when Sato-san wasn't looking. 8 names were listed as current guests. Someone was missing. I tried to be subtle about investigating, checking each guest room twice during my cleaning round. One room at the very end of the hall appeared untouched, the futon still perfectly made as if no one had slept there. But personal items remained: a backpack, clothes, a phone charger plugged into the wall. The guest had simply vanished without their belonging. When I asked Yuki about the missing guest, showing her 8 fingers and pointing to the breakfast room, then 7 fingers with a questioning look, her face paled. She pretended not to understand, quickly finishing her task and hurrying away. Kenji found me later, pulling me aside with an urgency I hadn't seen before. "You asked about missing guest," he hissed. "Never do this. Too dangerous. What happened to them?" I demanded. "Should we call the police?" "No police, no questions." His eyes were wide with fear. "This is the exchange. One taken, others safe. Balance maintained." I felt sick. "Taken? By who? What are you talking about?" "The hungry ones. They take one, leave others alone. Agreement very old." He gripped my arm. "Why you think charm's so important? Why doors stay closed at night?" "That's insane," I said, pulling away from him. "If someone's missing, we need to help them." "Cannot help. Already gone." He looked at me sadly. "You think program chose you randomly? No family to miss you right away. No connections. Perfect for exchange if needed." The implication hit me like a physical blow. I was a backup offering. Someone to be taken if necessary, to maintain whatever sick balance this village believed in. My hands shook as I touched the charm around my neck, suddenly understanding its real purpose. Not to protect me, but to mark me. That night, I barricaded my door with my suitcase and the small table from my room. The scratching came earlier, more frantic, and the voices were louder. I could now make out one phrase being repeated in English. "Let us in. Let us in. Let us in." I didn't sleep at all, researching on my phone how to get back to Tokyo on my own. The village had no taxi service, and the bus came only twice a week. The next one wouldn't arrive for 3 days. I considered hiking out, but the nearest town was apparently 20 miles away through dense forest, a journey I wasn't equipped for. By morning, I was exhausted, but determined to confront Sato-san. I needed answers before I could figure out my escape plan. I found her in her office, account books spread before her, muttering to herself as she worked. "What happens to the missing guests?" I asked, without preamble. She looked up slowly, her ancient face unreadable. Then she sighed, setting down her pen. In halting, heavily accented English, she responded, "You American, always questions, never acceptance." "Someone is missing," I insisted. "Their stuff is still in their room. Not missing. Chosen." She pointed to a framed scroll on her wall, covered in calligraphy I couldn't read. "Agreement very old. Ancestors make deal. Hungry ones stay in their world. We stay in ours. But bridge needs maintenance." "The hostel is the bridge," I said, remembering Kenji's words. She nodded. "Special place. Thin place between worlds. Hungry ones can come through here, but agreement keeps us safe. One chosen, others protected." She tapped her fingers on the account book. "Fair exchange. There's nothing fair about someone being taken against their will." "Not against will. All guests told when they arrive. Rules explained. Warning given." She narrowed her eyes. "You think charm just superstition. You think rules just for control. No. Protection and warning." I thought about the missing guest's room, the belongings left behind. If they knew the risks, why leave everything behind? "Cannot take things between worlds," she said simply. "Body only." I felt cold despite the warm spring day. "And these, hungry ones, what do they do with the chosen?" Sato-san's expression softened slightly. Best not to know, Quinn-san. Just wear charm. Follow rules. You will be safe. But I couldn't let it go. That night, after barricading my door again, I used the small pocket knife from my suitcase to carefully cut open my protective charm. Inside was a folded paper, covered in calligraphy, a lock of dark hair, and something that made my blood run cold. A small human tooth, yellowed with age. I was examining these contents when the scratching started at my door, more violent than previous night. The voices were louder too, no longer trying to be coaxing or childlike. They had dropped all pretense, growling and snarling what sounded like demands. Then a new sound joined them, something heavy throwing itself against my door. The paper walls shook with each impact. My barricade wouldn't hold for long against that kind of force. In a panic, I tried to refill the charm, but my hands were shaking too badly to fold the paper properly. The tiny tooth fell to the floor, rolling under the furniture where I couldn't retrieve. Without thinking clearly, I grabbed my phone and began recording the sounds, thinking wildly that I needed evidence, needed people to know what was happening here if I didn't make it out. That's when my phone received a text message. Impossible. Given there was no cell service in the village, it was from an unknown number, the text in Japanese. As I stared at it, confused, the characters rearranged themselves before my eyes, forming English words. Let us in, Quinn. We're so hungry. As if in response to my horror, my phone began showing notifications, dozens of them, all from various messaging apps I used. Friends, family, coworkers, all sending the same message. Let us in. We're waiting for you. Let us in. My phone's screen flickered. Images flashing too quickly to properly see, distorted faces, open mouths with too many teeth, eyes that blinked sideways. The barrage was overwhelming, and I dropped the phone like it had burned me. The pounding at my door intensified. The paper was beginning to tear in places, and through the rips I could see not the hostile hallway, but darkness, complete and unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the light from my room where it spilled through the tears. From this darkness, things were emerging, thin, elongated fingers with too many joints pushing through the tears, widening them. I couldn't see the bodies these fingers belonged to, just those grasping, clawing hands reaching for me. In desperation, I grabbed my partially reconstructed charm and held it up toward the door. The fingers recoiled momentarily, but then pushed forward again with renewed determination. The charm was incomplete without the tooth. Its power diminished. I backed away until I hit the far wall, frantically searching the room for any escape. The window was too small, and I knew what waited outside in the darkness anyway. There was nowhere to run. The tearing sounds grew louder as the paper door began to shred completely. Through the widening gaps, I caught glimpses of what waited beyond. Not creatures exactly, but something like negative space in the shape of people, darker than the darkness around them, with pinpoints of pale blue light where eyes should be. A hand burst through, impossibly long and thin, grabbing at the air inches from my face. I screamed and threw myself to the side just as my barricade finally gave way. The door collapsed inward, and with it came the hungry ones. 3 shadowy figures that moved with a terrible, fluid grace. They were human-shaped but wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions, faces smooth and featureless, except for those glowing eyes and mouths that opened far wider than any human mouth should. I scrambled backward, my hand landing on something small and hard, the tooth from my charm. Without thinking, I snatched it up and shoved it back into the fabric pouch, crushing the whole thing in my fist as the nearest entity reached for me. The effect was immediate. The creatures recoiled, hissing in voices like rustling paper. The darkness around them seemed to waver like heat rising from pavement. I raised the charm higher, and they retreated further toward the ruined door. Hope surged through me, until I saw what was standing in the hallway behind them. Kenji, but not Kenji as I knew him. His face was serene, eyes vacant, body unnaturally still. In his outstretched hands, he held his own protective charm, torn open. Balance must be maintained, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Exchange must happen, if not the chosen guest, then another. Understanding hit me with sickening clarity. The missing guest hadn't been taken at random. Someone had been chosen, deliberately selected to satisfy the hungry ones. And now Kenji was offering himself in my place. No, I lunged forward, intending to stop him, to pull him back from the threshold where he stood. But I was too late. The shadow figures turned from me to him, their attention captured by the easier prey. As I watched in horror, they flowed around him like ink in water, their forms melding with his shadow. Kenji's expression never changed, even as his body began to distort, stretching and twisting, as if viewed through warped glass. There was no blood, no violence, just a terrible, silent absorption. One moment Kenji stood there, and the next he was gone, leaving nothing behind but his empty charm on the floor. The darkness receded with him, the hallway returning to normal, lit dimly by the nightlights. Sato-san always left burning. I sat trembling on my floor, charm clutched so tightly in my hand that my fingernails broke the skin of my palm. Moments later, footsteps hurried down the hall. Sato-san appeared in my doorway, taking in the destruction with resigned eye. Behind her stood Yuki and Hana, faces grave but unsurprised, balance restored. Sato-san said quietly, "Safe now, until next time." She helped me to my feet and led me to another room, as if nothing more unusual had happened than a door breaking in the wind, as if Kenji hadn't just been consumed before my eyes. I spent the rest of the night in a state of shock, unable to process what I'd witnessed. In the morning, Sato-san brought me a new charm, stronger, she said, and acted as if Kenji had never existed. When I mentioned his name, she looked through me as if I hadn't spoken. I left on the next bus 3 days later. No one tried to stop me. No one mentioned Kenji or the missing guest. Tanaka appeared to escort me back to Tokyo, as silent and professionally detached as when he'd brought me. At the airport, as I prepared to board my flight home, he finally spoke about what had happened. "The village has existed for over 1,000 years," he said. "The agreement is older still. Sometimes sacrifices must be made so that many may live. This is the way of things." "It's monstrous," I whispered, still haunted by the image of Kenji's placid face as the shadows took him. Perhaps. Tanaka didn't disagree, but ask yourself this, Quinn-san. If the hungry ones were not fed at the bridge, where do you think they would go instead? How many would they take if not bound by the agreement? He pressed something into my hand, a new protective charm, smaller than the one from the village, but similar in design. Distance helps, but they have seen you now. Best to be cautious. I wanted to throw it back at him, to reject everything about Kurosawa and its terrible bargain. But then I remembered those elongated fingers reaching for me, those hollow eyes that glowed like cold stars. I put the charm in my pocket. 6 months later, back in Ohio, I still wear it. I've seen 3 therapists, all of whom believe I suffered a psychotic break brought on by culture shock and isolation. None of them believe in hungry shadows or ancient agreements. Sometimes I almost convince myself they're right, almost. But on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the world grows quiet, I hear scratching at my bedroom door. Soft at first, then more insistent. A voice calls my name, Kenji's voice now, asking to be let in. I keep the charm close and never answer, because I know what waits on the other side. The end.